Her breath grazed my ear, her fingers lingering where they shouldn't. You make it hard to concentrate. In that charged moment, the line between caution and desire blurred completely. The weather outside matched my mood. Gray, dull, and uneventful. Clouds hung low in the sky, filtering what little sunlight tried to break through, casting everything in muted shades of beige and gray. When I stepped into the clinic, the transition from the cool air outside to the sterile, warm interior felt jarring. The room was the epitome of practicality, with spotless white walls and an artificial brightness that hummed faintly from fluorescent lights overhead. The faint scent of antiseptic lingered, sharp and a little intrusive, making me think of countless other clinics I'd visited in the past, none of them memorable. A clock ticked somewhere on the wall, its rhythmic sound blending seamlessly into the subdued of the room's air conditioning. I adjusted my plain gray jacket and sat stiffly in one of the molded plastic chairs, feeling like a misplaced piece in this clinical puzzle. This was supposed to be routine, a quick checkup to tick off my overdue health to-do list. I wasn't expecting anything more than a few mumbled questions, a stethoscope on my chest, and a signature on my way out. Then she walked in. The soft click of the door opening broke the monotony, and I looked up, caught off guard by the figure that entered. She was striking. Her uniform was crisp and perfectly tailored, the stark white fabric accentuating her curves without looking out of place. Her hair, a shade of rich chestnut brown, was swept up into a neat bun, though a few rebellious strands had slipped free, brushing softly against her neck. Her lips had just the faintest hint of color, not bold, but enough to catch the eye. But it was her eyes that truly drew me in. Light blue, sharp and intelligent, with a spark that seemed to hold secrets she didn't intend to share. Her presence altered the atmosphere in the room. It was as if the stale air had been replaced with something warmer, softer, and undeniably more intriguing. "Good morning," she said, her voice low and even, with just the right touch of warmth to make it inviting. "Alex Carter, right?" I nodded, clearing my throat. "Yes, that's me." She offered a polite professional smile and extended her hand. "I'm Emily Harper. I'll be taking care of you today." Her hand was soft, her grip firm. Not too tight, but enough to feel solid. "Nice to meet you," I replied, though the words felt a little awkward leaving my mouth. She motioned for me to follow her into the exam room. Inside, the room was small but immaculately clean. The kind of space that felt devoid of personality, yet carried an unshakable sense of order. The exam table, with its thin, crinkling sheet of paper, dominated the room. Cabinets lined one wall, and a faint chemical smell permeated the air. Emily gestured toward the table. "Go ahead and have a seat. This won't take long." I nodded again, suddenly hyper-aware of every move I made. As I settled on the table, I noticed she had turned her back to retrieve something from the counter. A clipboard, maybe, or some other tool of her trade. It gave me a moment to glance at her without being too obvious. Her movements were fluid, efficient, and purposeful, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made it impossible not to notice her. She radiated a quiet confidence, the kind that made you feel like she was entirely in control of every moment in the room. When she turned back to face me, her smile was still in place, but this time I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Amusement, curiosity. It was gone before I could fully register it, leaving me unsure if I'd imagined it. "All right," she said, stepping closer. Her voice was calm and soothing, like she'd done this 1,000 times before. "We'll start with some basics. Relax your arm for me." I extended my arm, and she wrapped a blood pressure cuff around it with practiced ease. The touch of her fingers was light but precise, almost clinical, yet somehow not. "Deep breaths," she instructed, and I complied, though my chest felt tighter than it should have. Her proximity was almost distracting. She stood just close enough that I could catch the faint scent of her perfume, something floral and understated, with a hint of spice. It clung to the air between us, cutting through the antiseptic chill and making the space feel strangely intimate. When she looked up from her work, her gaze lingered on mine for a fraction, unnameable spark in her eyes, as though she was sizing me up, not just as a patient, but as something else. "Your blood pressure's a little higher than average," she noted, her tone casual, but edged with a hint of humor. "Nervous?" I chuckled softly, though the sound felt forced. "Not really. Maybe it's just the room." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "It does take some getting used to." She moved back to the counter, making a few notes on her clipboard. The momentary distance gave me space to think, though my thoughts were a mess of conflicting impressions. She was a professional, no doubt about it. But there was something unshakably magnetic about her, an effortless charm that made it hard to look away. As she finished writing, she glanced at me over her shoulder, her expression neutral yet strangely penetrating. "All right, Alex, let's get started." There was a weight to her words, subtle but undeniable. It made me wonder if I had walked into something far more unexpected than the routine checkup I'd anticipated. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I found myself leaning into that uncertainty, curious to see where it might lead. Emily had excused herself. I wasn't sure why her presence had such a hold over me, but it was undeniable. The door opened again a few minutes later, and she stepped back in, a small leather-bound notebook in her hand. This time, something about her felt different. Her stride was smooth, confident, almost deliberate. She moved with an ease that made the clinical setting feel less sterile, her heels making the faintest sound against the polished floor. As she approached, she gently nudged the door closed behind her, the soft click echoing in the room like a punctuation mark. For a brief moment, it felt as though she'd sealed us off from the rest of the world. "All right," she said, her voice carrying a melodic warmth as she approached. "Let's get started with the rest of the exam." She positioned herself beside me, standing just close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. My pulse quickened, though I told myself it was just the anticipation of the exam. "Let's check your pulse first," Emily said, her tone calm yet low, each word carefully measured as if she were stretching out the moment. I extended my arm, and her fingers brushed against my wrist. Her touch was cool, but soft, sending an involuntary shiver up my spine. She noticed her lips curving into a subtle smile that she quickly hid as she focused on her watch. Her proximity was impossible to ignore. The faint floral notes of her perfume mixed with something richer, more grounded, creating an intoxicating combination that dulled the clinical nature of the setting. "You're a little tense," she said, glancing at me from the corner of her eye. "Relax." "I'm fine," I replied, though the stiffness in my voice betrayed me. Her thumb pressed gently against my wrist, her touch lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. She glanced at me again, this time with a knowing glint in her eyes. "Your heart rate's a little fast," she noted, a playful undertone in her voice. "Feeling nervous?" "No," I said quickly, forcing a laugh. "It's just the room. It's cold." She hummed softly, a sound that felt almost like a challenge. Emily moved on to the next part of the exam, her demeanor professional, yet undeniably captivating. "Go ahead and unbutton your shirt," she instructed, stepping back to give me space. Her tone was light, but there was an edge to it. Firm, almost commanding, as though the simple act carried a deeper weight. I hesitated for a second, then complied, undoing the buttons slowly. I couldn't shake the feeling of her eyes on me, even though she was jotting something down in her notebook. When I looked up, her gaze flicked to mine briefly before settling on my chest. Her movements were precise as she reached for the stethoscope, but the way her eyes lingered just for a fraction of a second made my breath catch. "This might feel a little cold," she said, her voice dropping slightly. The stethoscope touched my skin, sending a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. Emily leaned in closer, her face just inches from mine as she listened carefully. Her focus seemed entirely on the task at hand, but there was something in the way she moved, fluid, deliberate, that made the air between us feel heavier. "Deep breath," she instructed, her tone softer now. I inhaled slowly, trying to steady the quickening rhythm of my thoughts. Her hand brushed against my shoulder lightly as she adjusted the stethoscope, the warmth of her skin contrasting with the chill of the instrument. As she worked, her eyes flicked upward, meeting mine briefly. In that fleeting moment, I saw something. An unspoken question, a hint of curiosity that disappeared as quickly as it had come. "You're doing fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She moved the stethoscope lower, the movement slow and deliberate. Her fingers lingered on my skin just a little too long, and I felt my breath hitch involuntarily. The room felt smaller now, the walls seeming to close in around us. Every sound, the scratch of her pen on paper, the faint rustle of fabric as she adjusted her position, was amplified in the stillness. Emily straightened, pulling back just slightly, though her presence remained overwhelming. "I need to check one more thing," she said, her tone quieter than before. She stepped away briefly to retrieve another instrument, her movements measured. When she returned, her expression had softened, but her eyes carried the same unspoken weight. "Lift your arm for me," she said, her voice almost soothing. Her hands were steady as she examined me, but the tension in the room was impossible to ignore. Every touch, every glance seemed to carry an undercurrent of something unsaid, something just out of reach. As she finished, Emily stepped back, her gaze lingering on me longer than it should have. "You're doing well," she said softly, her lips curving into a small smile. Her words were simple, but the way she said them made my pulse quicken all over again. Emily's eyes flicked to mine one last time before she spoke again, her voice even lower than before. "I'll need to check a little more in a moment. Just sit tight." She turned and moved to the counter, her back to me as she scribbled something in her notes. The distance should have been grounding, but instead it only heightened the anticipation coursing through me. I watched her for a moment, trying to make sense of the strange energy between us. There was something undeniably magnetic about her, a pull that I couldn't quite explain. As she turned back to face me, her expression unreadable, but her eyes still holding that inexplicable spark, I realized one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was happening here, it was far from routine. Emily turned back to me, her clipboard now resting on the counter behind her. Her expression was calm, but there was something in her eyes, an intensity that seemed to anchor the room in place. "Alex," she began, her voice steady but unusually soft, "I need you to unbutton your pants for this next part of the exam." The words hung in the air, startling in their directness, yet spoken with an assuredness that left little room for hesitation. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "Sorry, what?" I asked, my voice unintentionally quieter than I'd intended. She didn't falter. "It's just part of the procedure," she said smoothly, her tone not quite clinical, but close enough to reassure, or at least it should have been. I hesitated, a faint heat rising to my face. "Sure. Of course." My fingers fumbled for a moment before I complied, slowly unfastening the button and sliding the zipper down. The air in the room seemed to thicken as I shifted on the exam table, acutely aware of every sound. The soft crinkle of paper beneath me, the faint of the fluorescent lights, and the nearly imperceptible inhale Emily took as she stepped closer. Her movements were deliberate as she leaned in, positioning herself at the edge of the table. She knelt slightly, her gaze briefly lowering before flicking back to mine. "Just relax," she murmured, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. Her hands moved with precision, but there was something about the way she touched me. Light, careful, almost deliberate. It wasn't like any examination I'd ever had before. Her fingertips brushed against my skin, and though the contact was fleeting, it left a lingering warmth that spread through me. "You're tense," Emily said softly, her head tilting just enough for me to catch the faintest hint of a smile. "Yeah. Well, this is a little unexpected," I admitted, my voice shaky as I tried to force a laugh. She looked up at me then, her blue eyes locking onto mine. "It's okay. Just let go." Her tone was soothing, but it carried an undercurrent that was impossible to ignore. Her fingers lingered for a fraction longer than necessary, and I swore I felt her touch falter just slightly, as if even she wasn't immune to whatever strange energy had settled over us. "Is everything all right?" I asked, unsure if I was breaking some invisible rule by speaking. Emily didn't respond immediately. She straightened, her gaze trailing up to meet mine again. Her lips parted as if to say something, but for a moment, no words came out. Then softly she said, "I shouldn't say this," but her voice trailed off, and I watched as she bit her bottom lip, the motion small but strangely captivating. "But," I prompted, my own voice quieter now. "You make it hard to concentrate," she admitted, her words tumbling out in a way that felt both spontaneous and deliberate. The confession caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing coherent came to mind. Instead, I laughed nervously, hoping to lighten the moment. "Sorry about that," I said, though the apology felt hollow. Her gaze softened, and she let out a quiet laugh of her own. "Don't be. It's not your fault." The space between us felt smaller now, the air charged with an unspoken understanding neither of us seemed willing or able to acknowledge aloud. Emily leaned in slightly, her hand brushing against my thigh as she adjusted her position. The touch was fleeting, innocent enough to pass as accidental, yet deliberate enough to send a shiver coursing through me. "Are you comfortable?" she asked, her tone still professional, but with an unmistakable warmth. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Yeah, I'm fine." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Good." But her eyes said something entirely different. The tension reached its breaking point when she shifted again, leaning in closer. Her face was just inches from mine now, her breath warm against my skin. "Emily," I murmured, my voice rougher than I'd intended. Is this okay?" She tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "Does it feel okay to you?" I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. It feels I trailed off, unable to find the right word. She smiled then, a small knowing smile that sent a fresh wave of heat through me. That's what matters. I wasn't sure who moved first, her or me. All I knew was that one moment we were suspended in that unbearable tension, and the next, the space between us vanished. Her lips brushed against mine, tentative at first, as if testing the waters. But when I didn't pull away, the kiss deepened, growing more urgent, more consuming. It was like a floodgate had opened, years of restraint spilling out all at once. Her hands found their way to my shoulders, gripping tightly as if to ground herself. I responded instinctively, my own hands reaching for her waist, pulling her closer. The sterile chill of the room melted away, replaced by a heat that seemed to radiate from both of us. Every kiss, every touch felt like a confirmation of something unspoken, something we'd both been holding back for far too long. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless, our foreheads resting together. Emily's eyes searched mine as if looking for reassurance, or perhaps permission. I shouldn't have done that, she whispered, though her tone lacked conviction. I shook my head, my hands still resting on her hips. I don't regret it, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She smiled faintly, her fingers tracing a light path along my arm. Neither do I. And just like that, the lines we'd so carefully maintained were gone, replaced by something raw and undeniable. Whatever this was, it couldn't be undone. And in that moment, neither of us wanted it to be. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that settles after a storm has passed, but leaves everything trembling in its wake. The sterile air of the clinic now felt thick with something else entirely, something neither of us dared to name. Emily took a small step back, creating a sliver of space between us. Her breathing was uneven, her cheeks flushed with a color that betrayed her otherwise composed demeanor. She brushed a strand of loose hair behind her ear, her fingers trembling slightly. Her eyes met mine, a mix of emotions swirling within them. Guilt, uncertainty, but also a flicker of something warmer. Satisfaction. I shouldn't have done that, she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Her words hung between us, fragile yet weighted. But before she could say more, I reached out, my hand brushing against hers. I don't regret it, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. My gaze locked onto hers, willing her to understand that whatever this was, it wasn't something I'd take back. Emily's lips parted slightly, as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, she exhaled softly, a sound that was equal parts relief and resignation. She leaned in slowly, her movements hesitant, as if testing the boundaries we had already shattered. Her lips brushed against my cheek in a fleeting, delicate kiss, a touch so soft it felt like a whisper. It wasn't an apology, nor was it a goodbye. It was something in between, a gesture of gratitude perhaps, or an acknowledgement of the line we'd crossed together. When she pulled back, her eyes lingered on mine, searching, questioning, but neither of us spoke. There was no need to. The air between us, once charged with tension, now felt quieter. Not empty, but full of an understanding that didn't require words. Emily turned away, moving back to the counter where her clipboard and notes lay waiting. Her steps were slower, as if she was giving herself time to recompose. She picked up the clipboard, holding it like a shield, but her fingers tapped against it absent-mindedly, betraying the calm facade she was trying to project. I adjusted my shirt, buttoning it up with deliberate slowness, though my hands felt clumsy. My heart was still pounding in my chest, the aftershocks of what had just transpired refusing to settle. From the corner of my eye, I saw her glance at me. It was quick, fleeting, but there was no mistaking the warmth in her gaze, a softness that hadn't been there when I first walked into the clinic. She cleared her throat, lightly, breaking the silence. "All right," she said, her tone more measured now, though still laced with a quiet intimacy. "You're all set. Just take it easy, okay?" I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Sure, I'll try." Emily moved to the door, her hand resting on the handle. She hesitated for a moment before opening it, turning back to face me. "See you next time, Alex," she said, her voice carrying an odd mix of professionalism and something much more personal. Her lips curved into a soft smile, one that hinted at promises unspoken. "Yeah," I replied, my voice low. "See you." She opened the door, and I stepped out into the hallway. The abrupt shift from the intimacy of the exam room to the sterile emptiness of the corridor was disorienting. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, none of which I could pin down. As I walked away, something made me glance back over my shoulder. Through the small gap of the door she hadn't fully closed, I saw her watching me. Her expression unreadable, but her eyes unwavering. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of us again, connected by something fragile and undefined. Then the door clicked shut, breaking the spell. I turned back and continued down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the quiet space. My heart still raced my mind, replaying every second of what had just happened. I didn't know what it meant, if it was the start of something, or just a fleeting moment we'd both carry in silence. But as I reached the exit, I found myself smiling, the memory of her lingering like a faint, unshakable whisper. As I stepped into the gray daylight outside, her eyes still haunted me, a lingering question I couldn't answer. Was it a fleeting spark, or the start of something deeper? What do you think?